Thank you for listening to this PYA webinar recast. PYA is pleased to offer this alternative way to access our thought leadership. This is a recording of a previously delivered webinar. The information is accurate as of the date of the original event. The video recording, slides, and associated material for this and all PYA webinars are available on our website at pyapc.com. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as legal advice or an official opinion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's CPE Summer Symposium, Hot Topics in Healthcare, Day 2. Our second presentation of the day is AI in Healthcare Cybersecurity, Risks, Compliance, and Practice. As this event is for CPE credit, there are some additional steps that we'll take in order to comply with NASBA's requests. Attendees will be provided with 5 polling questions for this session. Responses are documented electronically. In accordance with NASBA, attendees must respond to at least 3 of the polling questions within the allotted time in order to receive CPE credit. At the close of the session, a post-event survey will also be provided for attendees to submit feedback regarding their webinar experience. The polling questions and post-event survey must be submitted for proof of participation today. Credits will only be earned for sessions attended in their entirety. Your CPE certificates are downloadable via the Continuing Education pane once you have completed all requirements. We've posted a PDF copy of the presentation slides for your reference in the Resources pane. Also, all sessions are recorded and you'll receive an email later today with a link to a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. You may submit questions directly to today's presenter by typing a message into the Q&A pane. We'll collect these and they'll be responded to via email after the event. With that, I would like to introduce our presenter, John Cross.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session here this afternoon. I am hopeful that you will find something useful out of this this deck that I have here. It is rather extensive, and there is a bit of detail here. So I'm not going to drain every slide, but as mentioned, you will have access to the deck for your own reference. And so with that, let's just jump in. So as far as our agenda, we're going to talk about the threat landscape for healthcare. We'll talk about AI as it's used in intrusion. We'll talk about AI as it's used in defense or intelligence. We'll also talk, it's not specifically called out here, but we're going to talk a little bit about how the difference between custom developing applications and the security footprint around those versus buy versus build. Some governance and frameworks that are applicable to this particular topic, and then some what I hope you will find to be very practical statements, some practical guidance for putting some of this stuff into practice. All right, so let's talk about the threat landscape. Again, I won't drain these slides, but they'll be there for you. So just to highlight a couple of things, 276 million plus healthcare records were affected by healthcare breaches in 2024 alone. 1,710 healthcare incidents with 1,542 confirmed disclosures. The one in the upper right-hand corner is interesting. This 279 days is the average time that it takes to identify and contain a healthcare breach per this study. Now, it's 241 days globally across all industries. So we in healthcare are a little bit behind the curve there when it comes to detecting and identifying these breaches. Year-over-year increase in espionage as a motive for attacks went from 1% to 16%. So we'll talk a little bit about that more as we go along as well. So this particular slide, just one note in the notes that you can download. This one is corrected, but the title on these 2 boxes, the blue box and the green box, are actually switched. So that's my fault. I apologize for that. But the version that you can download, that's been corrected. So when we talk about securing traditional IT infrastructure or IT infrastructure in general, the thing that we are most concerned about is protecting the network and the data. And the data extends to applications and other things, right? But it's protecting that edge, the perimeter, keeping folks out that shouldn't be in. And then if somebody gets in, protecting the data from being exfiltrated and the like. When we talk about securing AI, though, it's a little bit more complex. And there's a little bit more uniqueness to that, because we also have to concern ourselves with defending, from a cybersecurity perspective, the model itself. So this is more than just some black box with an application running on it or some binary code. The model itself needs to be protected. The algorithms that make up that model and that are bound around that model. The data that's used for both training and the outputs from that model. We have to protect those from manipulation and misuse and other things. So I just wanted to point this out, use this slide to point out that when it comes to securing AI and the use of AI tools in your environment, it does create some complexity and some uniqueness that you have to concern yourself with. Also, for our discussion today, I want to just talk about some classification of AI and AI technologies. Now, depending on who you have spoken to or listened to speak in the past, they classify these things slightly differently. AI has been around from an IT industry perspective, computer science perspective, since the 60s. So there's nothing new in that sense. What's new is obviously some of the computing power and capabilities that have just skyrocketed in terms of what these models can do and what these systems can do. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to classify these things in these three buckets. And that is what I would call traditional machine learning or AI analytics platforms. So these things are used for things like predictive models, for patient risk scores. We've had those kinds of things in the past, decision support systems and those kinds of things, readmission forecasts, disease progression analysis, analytics. All of those kinds of things are the things that traditionally fall into that category. Then we have generative AI. And this is actually where all of the press, all your social media, all the news, all of that stuff has been in the last few years, based on some real both technical and engineering progress that has been made over the last few years that makes generative AI a reality. And so generative AI is just that. It is going to create content. It creates text, images, code, voice, video, whatever it is, from a prompt or a set of inputs that go into the system. And then based on what it has been trained to do, and it will infer what you're asking it to do from the prompt and then generate something as output, right? So the examples here are clinical documentation, patient communication, chat bots, right? You're chatting back and forth and the patient's actually chatting with an AI. Medical imaging interpretation tools, those have been around for quite some time. They're now enhanced some with this functionality. And then, of course, ambient scribing. All of those kind of generally fall into that generative AI or software as a service model. AI as data processing, or that classification. So these are the background systems. So these are what I would call the black boxes of the world, right? So you don't really touch and feel a lot of it because it doesn't take user input, but it does take automated input from other systems, APIs or the like, or data calls, data flows in and out. These things are like automated medical coding, de-identification tools for PHI, claims adjudication, et cetera. Those kinds of things where you're just simply giving it a structured input and it's going to give you a structured output. But in between there, the processing is AI based or LLM based. So when we talk about just the overall technology stack that's involved in traditional IT versus the AI stack, when you look at the total components of from a traditional software tech stack, you're looking at 3 to 5 layers, right? These include things like the application layer, the data layer, the infrastructure layer. There's an ISO model for please don't throw sausage pizza away. That is an acronym for how traditional applications are kind of built. So you have that whole bit and the artifacts from that, from the outputs of that and things that you really concern yourself with are things like source code. Because you have to have that source code. And then from a governance perspective, you have to manage that code. So you're going to be doing code reviews and make sure that somebody hasn't created a backdoor, those kinds of things. And you're going to do version control, those kinds of things. Again, whether this is happening in-house to your organization, if you're doing custom development, or it's happening from a software vendor that you might be buying a solution from, these are the things that they have to worry about. When it comes to AI, though, there's much more complex items that you have to concern yourself with. So it now moves from 3 to 5 layers to now 5 to 7+ layers. You've got a governance layer, and this is more than just simple governance as you would expect in terms of compliance and those kinds of things. But this is security governance. This is ethics, right? To make sure that that what you're doing and how you're using the tool is in fact morally and ethically sound and meets with your overall organization's principles and goals. And then there's, of course, the traditional things like compliance frameworks and the like. The application layer is more than just code. It's prompts, right? So you have to worry with, in the generative world, you have to worry with how did those prompts get constructed. If there are layers of prompts, and that's really important, because in today's world, whether you're using Copilot, Perplexity, OpenAI, any of those tools, they all have what you have typed in specifically. They also have a memory layer of things that it has remembered about you and your history in interacting with it. And then they have the system layer, which is the sort of overall guiding principles for every communication that comes into that model, how it handles itself. So for instance, Perplexity, some of you may or may not be familiar with that particular tool. It is known as a very good research tool because at the system level, it ensures that everything that it returns back to you is not hallucinated. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hallucinate, but it does a really good job of preventing hallucination, because everything that it does from a system prompt level tries to ensure that everything is referenceable. So when you get a response back to it, it'll give you all of the citations for everything that you've asked it or that it's provided back to you. And so when you consider all the different layers involved, what you've typed in as a prompt, those memory layers that it knows about you, and then the system prompts, you have to worry about all of that in terms of the application layer. And you have to worry about those from a cybersecurity perspective, regulatory perspective, compliance perspective, all of those kinds of things, which we'll talk about more as we go through today. Model and orchestration. So this is your LLM. Everybody, I'm assuming that most everyone here understands these terms, but if you don't, by all means, you can ask questions about it. We'll get those answered for you, or you can Google them, or you can chat GPT them, right? But the large language models are the foundation. It's the actual AI model that is out there that is doing all of the work, right? And then there's the orchestration that goes around that, which is the agents and the other things to make it do multi-step processing and the like, right? So from a tech stack perspective, you have to worry yourself with, how is all of that happening, right? How have I strung this thing together? How have I strung agents together? How do they call each other? Where is it making inferences versus, true hard inputs versus hard outputs, et cetera? The data engineering, so this is the vector embedding. So that's how does it chunkify data, and how does it go about approaching large sets of information that it needs to process. Versioning, the infrastructure that goes along with AI tools, again, whether you are using them, building these internally, or you're using a third party, because the infrastructure is different. You may have heard some of these terms where in traditional computing, we worry ourselves with CPU, RAM, storage, those kinds of things. On the AI side, it's GPUs, which are the graphic processing units, because they are uniquely tuned to be able to process neural networks and AIs. And so you hear all the industry noise, right? Whether you're listening to it in news or podcasts or whatnot about big data centers that are needed to support AI processing, because they take a lot of compute power, and that compute power, because it's GPU based, generates a lot of heat. Therefore, it generates a lot of need for cooling, which means water requirements, and there's electricity requirements. And you hear the data centers that are necessary in order to run these things, and they're huge and they're massive, and people don't want them in their in their locality, right? So there's all those things that go along with that. And from an ethical perspective, just as a human, right, you do kind of have to worry about the implications and the footprint of that, just like you would with solar or gas or any other sort of item that we consume, right? But so you have to worry about those in the tech stack. So the artifacts are traditionally the data. That's the training data and other things that go into that model. And then the model itself, so not the code, but the model itself, the large language model and all the bits that go around that, those are the primary assets that you have to concern yourself with. And from a governance perspective, you do have to have a comprehensive set of model registries, right? So whatever AIs you're using in your system, you need to make sure that you know that those are AI based and not just a traditional input-output software application. You need to monitor for drift. You need to monitor for continuous retraining and training to make sure that it is giving you good, relevant, accurate results based on the most recent available data. So I'll probably dive into this a little bit later, but one of the things that you consider, or that has to be considered when you talk about training data, and this ties into ethics and other things, is how is the healthcare model trained? So if the model is providing, for instance, clinical interventions or recommended clinical interventions, if it's looking for certain biomarkers or other things, whether it be an imaging scan or other things, if that data set was only trained on a certain demographic, say a certain gender, a certain age, a certain race, a certain geography, then you are likely to get very different results based on what you input into it if that model hasn't been trained appropriately, or if it has been trained because it's, let's say it's trained specifically for a particular function and it's known because the vendor should tell you that it was trained with these demographics in mind, that you don't misuse it, right? That you don't use it for something that it's not intended for. And that goes back to the governance side to make sure that you're not only have the proper AI, it's properly trained, it's properly managed, it's properly defended against from cyber attack and other things like model drift, et cetera, but that it's also only being used for the purpose that it's designed and function for. So this slide I threw in here because I think this just goes without saying, but I think this is important for all of us just to recognize. In healthcare, we all understand that basically everything is patient safety, right? As the CIO of a hospital, patient safety trumped everything, right? So I would say I need this or I need that. It may not have direct clinical implications or whatnot, but the clinical folks, if they had a need, that would always come first, right? When it was all said and done, because when it is all said and done, you can tie most everything to some sort of patient safety or clinical outcome, and rightly so, right? The whole purpose of healthcare is health care, right? And patient care. So when we are impacted by cyber attacks, by any sort of event that disrupts patient care, that is a patient safety event. And so Ryan White, VP of Industry Solutions at Proofpoint, made this comment: patient safety is inseparable from cyber safety, because by the transitive property, if everything is important because of patient safety, then cyber safety is equivalent, right? So, and I don't disagree with that, by the way. You can see here some stats on the impact. Medicare reported that between 2016 to 2021, 42 to 67 patients are estimated to have died based on ransomware delayed care. So case study real quick. So everybody is familiar with the Change Healthcare ransomware attack. You're probably directly impacted in some way. You can see down here that 192 million individuals were affected. It's the largest breach ever. That's more than half of all Americans were affected by that. 40% of all U.S. claims are processed through Change. That may not be true now, but it was at the time, given the need for some diversity there, I think, that the industry has recognized. But it cost ultimately $2 billion this event, and climbing. There's 49 lawsuits as of I think the beginning of the year, and so that actually may be more than that. And this all was triggered by a missing MFA control. right? So if the MFA controls had just been in place comprehensively across the board, it would have prevented this. The next case study is the Ascension Healthcare ransomware attack. So this one you may or may not have heard too much about, but it happened in May of 2024. It impacted 5.6 million patient records were compromised. There were EMS diversions, all kinds of things. There were month-long diversions for things like disruptions for labs and prescriptions, et cetera. And it resulted in a 1.1 billion net loss. Here's what's interesting. It only affected 7 servers out of 25,000 servers. So it doesn't take much, right, to truly impact operations and truly impact not only operations, clinical care, but also financials for an organization. And what's important is in terms of how this happened, an employee clicked on a file link that downloaded a malicious file, and it started the whole process. So a single employee clicking a link, inadequate endpoint controls led to system-wide catastrophe. So with that, we have our first polling question.
All right, our first question is the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, the largest healthcare breach in U.S. history, was initially enabled by which of the following? A zero-day exploit in the EHR system, an insider threat from a disgruntled employee, stolen credentials used on a system lacking multi-factor authentication, a supply chain compromise through a third-party vendor. Remember, you must fill out 3 polling questions to receive CPE credit. You will have approximately 30 seconds to answer. All right, thank you for participating in our poll. Now back to John.
Great. So I see that 62% said that it was stolen credentials used on a system lacking multi-factor authentication, and that is, in fact, the basis of that attack vector. So let's talk about AI as intrusion, or from an attack perspective. So how is AI weaponized against healthcare? Well, there's a number of things, and I'll try not to drain this slide, but I'll spend a little bit of time on it. AI enhanced phishing. So we're all familiar with phishing. You should all be trained, well trained on cybersecurity, phishing, and how to look for potential bad links and bad email and those kinds of things. What AI enhanced phishing is the bad actors using AI not only to figure out who they should target, but also doing some research on the target, some deeper research on the target in near real time, right? So what used to might take months or a year to identify a target and then figure out an attack vector, a good attack vector, can now be done in days, minutes, right? In order using AI, and we've gotten away from, even before AI, we were getting away from these very generic, right, looking phishing emails, and they were getting a little more targeted. Now they're very, very targeted, right? So they might look like, you might open one up and it looks like an entire conversation between your CFO and accounts payable, and that it's now come to you to say, go ahead and pay that, right? The CFO is saying, go ahead and pay that. And it looks very, very real. You click on the link, it downloads something, does something bad, or you actually pay an invoice that that sends money out. So AI enhanced phishing is out there. Deepfakes and voice cloning. So you might think, likely you have heard this in the press, but you might think, oh, deepfakes and voice cloning, that's kind of futuristic. That's not really real. It is absolutely real. I can take about 5 seconds of audio from anyone, and I can run it through an AI system that will clone the system, that will probably 99% fool your mother that it's you speaking. Right. And so that reality, that technology actually exists. So when you look at deep fake voicing or even imaging of a CEO, CFO, or anybody in a position of authority to make changes, request changes, do things like that, clearly that is a reality today. It is not something in the future. Polymorphic AI. So this has happened, again, ever since there were viruses and then malware and then ransomware. Bad actors have tried to use various techniques to disguise what the malware is doing. from the detection systems, whether it be the antivirus detection system or an endpoint detection system, EDR, endpoint detection and response, the modern versions. And what they have done now is they have the ability to basically rewrite the code so that it morphs, so that it's polymorphic, right, in real time, so that one attack looks very different than another, even though it's basically the same or coming from the same folks. And so it creates a problem for detection software. It creates a problem for analysts, right, human analysts who are looking for commonalities, and for threat reporting through aggregation like that we get from CISA or the FBI or whatnot, because then it might look like something totally different. So there's lots of different ways in which polymorphic AI malware is taking over in terms of making it very difficult to find. And then deepfake as a service. So this is an interesting one. What you have here is a situation where you have the foundational models that are out there that everybody's familiar with, Anthropic, OpenAI, and the like. They all have their data centers. They all have their models running. They produce new versions, sometimes within weeks of each other, and they're constantly pushing the industry forward. They also have guardrails, right? So they have some guardrails around how those systems are used and how their resources are used, especially on the free tiers, right, and the mid tiers that you pay for to have access to those models. So a good example of that, for instance, is recently you might have heard about the Anthropic Mythos model or Mythos model that has been released that could detect vulnerabilities in software faster and than anyone and in the history of the world, and you create new attack vectors, in minutes. And so they did not release that to the general public, right? So, but they did wind up sort of dumbing down a version and called it Fable, and they released Fable. Well, it didn't take too long before some third parties were able to jailbreak Fable. Fable had some controls around it, some very hard controls. You couldn't ask it questions about biology in case you were trying to build bioweapons. You couldn't ask it about cybersecurity in case you were trying to build, ransomware or do research for attack vectors. It had very hard controls, but it didn't take very long for people to get around those controls. So they took it off the market while they're reevaluating that. All of those primary vendors, those legitimate vendors, they have the ability to at least try to prevent bad actors from using their environment. So what's happened now is you have bad actors who are standing up their own environments. As I mentioned before, you can go and take these open weight models. So you can go and take models that are publicly available for free and for free use. You could run them on your laptop, your home server. You could run them, in your corporate server. You can train them to do anything that you want them to do. Just there's tools out there to do that. You can basically build your entire system off of that, which is what some of these vendors do, right? They go and get an open weight model. They build some controls around it. They train it with the data they want to train it on or whatever. You could do that too. Well, the bad actors have done that. Right. So they've done that with some of the deepfake models that are out there for voice cloning and visual video and imaging cloning and those kinds of things. And now what they do is they sell it. Right. So they sell it to other bad actors. So there's a whole economy, an ecosystem around this, where if I don't want to take the time to try to either set up my own private LLM and all of the things associated with that, I can just go to somebody, pay them the money to do it. And I'll just tell them, I want this CEO deepfaked saying this, and it'll come right back to me. I give them a little bit of money and we're done. Right. So that's that's out there, and that's a real reality that's happening. And I only mention it because it goes to the point and to the perspective that the actors are using AI and to enhance their capabilities, and therefore we need to be concerned ourselves with how we respond to those on the defense side of the house. Agentic AI exploitation is also very real. So this is where you have these agents that you have given permission to do certain things. You can give an agent permission to look up files, to alter entries in a database, to put notes on an EMR. We've given these agents some level of autonomy and responsibility, and they can be exploited. There's different ways to do that, again, through prompt injection and prompt poisoning and the like. We won't have to get into all of that, but basically you can inject things in those back end layers that I mentioned, where you have the different prompts, your prompt that you see visually, and then you have the other layers of prompts, the memory and the system prompts that are adding on to whatever you've typed in, that they can inject in there. Even just simple as sending you an email that you might have a Copilot agent set up to scan your email and do some certain things with, and they might embed text that is white so you don't see it, but it's there and the AI sees it, and it tells the AI to do something like send an email on your behalf to, all these people. They could make the font really, really small, again, so you might not be able to read it. So those prompt injection concerns and prompt poisoning are a real concern. Deepfakes in healthcare. So I already mentioned this, so I won't drain this, but executive impersonation, clinical impersonation. So you might have a physician calling in. It sounds just like the physician that that you go to church with, even. I mean, like you know their voice. So when they call the help desk to say, change my password, it sounds like them. And so you just change the password and bypass some of maybe the controls that you have. You might get a call to say, change this medication, do something clinical. Telemedicine fraud, insurance fraud, like synthetic identities for filing false claims, social engineering, as we've talked about. And this is where you get something urgent. It might be in the middle of the night. Again, it might be your CEO, CFO, CNO calling to say, hey, I need this done. And it sounds like them. You're a little groggy. You've just woke up. So you jump up. It's priority. So you do it. And you don't realize that you've just done something on behalf of a bad actor. And then AI agent impersonation. So this is that next level, since now AIs can be agentic, and you've given it rights and you've given it a role and you've given it responsibilities. Now you have to worry with, does it have too much rights, too many rights? Does it have elevated privileges where it shouldn't, and all of those kinds of things. So when they are compromised, they have access to do everything that you've given that agent to do. So why is healthcare uniquely vulnerable? We all know this, I think, inherently, because we're all in healthcare. Likely here, we have a culture of urgency, right? So we understand what STAT means. Back to the quote earlier that patient safety, everything can be tied to patient safety and patient care, and therefore we have this built-in sense of urgency for everything that we do. We have trust hierarchies, right? So that's built into our culture as well. So if a physician says, do this, or a nurse says, do this, the tech's going to go do that, or the nurse is going to go do that, or the AP person might go do that because that's what the CFO has said. We have those things built in. And so therefore we take verbal direction a lot of times, right? And so it's not unheard of for us to do that. We just have to be careful with it now, given all of the threat actors and what they can do now with AI. The value of data, PHI, sells for 25 to 50 times more than credit card data on the dark web. So that's right there makes healthcare the most valuable target for bad actors. Distributed workforce, that's not anything that's unique necessarily to healthcare. We have telehealth and remote coding, outsourced billing. There's other industries that have a similar, business function outsourcing. But every time you do so, you have increased your attack footprint, right, or your defense footprint, and that you need to concern yourself with for how those users are working in a remote environment. So there's some questions worth asking, right, yourself and of your organization. So does your organization have any deepfake awareness programs? So you're likely to have annual cybersecurity training, some phishing simulation that comes through to test your awareness of that kind of stuff in general, but have they included, and do you include deepfake awareness as part of that? If not, you should consider doing so. Are verbal authorization procedures verified through a secondary channel, right? So if the CFO calls you up in the middle of the night, you should feel confident in yourself enough, and you should have security as one of those things as your primary concern, enough to say, thank you, CFO. I will look into that, but I'm also need to verify that with the CEO, right? Or controller or whatever. Or if the doctor calls up, I'm going to need some other form of verification that I need to do this, whatever it is that you're asking me to do, depending on what it is, obviously. But do you have those secondary authorization channels, right? So something to look into. When we talk about AI as defense or intelligence, there's a number of things that we can do today and then where we're headed. And the bottom line is, just like AI has enabled the threat actors to move, it's increased both velocity and veracity of the attacks. AI has also enabled the defense sector to increase its capability in terms of identifying and responding to attacks. So one of the key things that happens from an IT perspective, as you can imagine, there is a lot of data that's generated, right? Every minute, every thing that happens every day in an IT system is generating logs. And so there's no human person can sit and look through all those logs and cull through all those logs in any way that's going to be meaningful. But AI can, right? And so when you take all of the behavior analytics that can come across things like, is data being moved? Did somebody elevate their privileges? Was a new admin account created and then renamed and then privileges changed? All these kinds of things that might go under the radar in terms of somebody in IT or elsewhere in the organization noticing it, but AI can notice it, right? Because it's looking for those kinds of things. And when it gets those signals, we call them, when it gets those signals in addition to some of the information that's coming in from the log activity, then it can triangulate based on those signals and create a risk profile to say, I think this is an actual attack or not, and then alert a human to that fact, right? And that's kind of where we are and have been over the last year or so. Is the AI systems are used to basically create better alerting. The next major step in that is where the AIs and the agentic part of AI is now taking some action. So I've given it the responsibility and the authority. If it sees something of a certain risk, right, or a certain activity, that it can automatically shut that user out, can automatically disable the user, shut down the machine, turn off the entire network, shut down the EMR, turn off the cloud, whatever it is that I want to give it to based on some parameters, I can tell it to do that. And it can do all of that in real time and very near real time in order to prevent an attack from cascading, right? So that's ultimately where AI is going from the defense perspective. So when you look at the two, you can see across phishing, malware, identity, network, speed, scale, agentic systems, there's different ways in which it's being used. AI is being used as both a weapon and as a shield. But here's the problem, right? Is that, as I mentioned, 279 days, 241 days on average, right, to identify that somebody has been, to detect a ransomware or a breach. But it can take less than 4 days for a bad actor to encrypt your environment. And so without AI, that discrepancy would be even greater. But there's a lot of work to be done in order to close that gap between how long it takes to detect and the speed at which a bad actor can disrupt us. That brings us to polling question 2.
All right, our second question is, which AI-driven threat can bypass biometric authentication and impersonate clinical staff in real time? Polymorphic malware, deepfake technology, AI-generated phishing emails, machine learning-based password cracking. You must fill out 3 questions to receive CPE credit. You'll have approximately 30 seconds to answer. All right, thank you for participating in our poll. Back to John.
Great. So we've got 72% of you have said that it's deepfake technology, audio, video, and that is correct. I am going to speed up a little bit because I see that we're running out of time, and we've got a few more slides and key points that I want to make. So I apologize if I start speaking really, really fast, but I'll try to cover some of these key points. From a governance perspective, there are really two main frameworks that you should concern yourself with, primarily because that's where HHS is concerning themselves, and that is the CSS Cybersecurity Framework version 2, which has been out for a while, and the relatively new AI RMF that's available. It's a version 1. You can see that there's some overlap between the categories or the families of controls that are necessary to satisfy each of those frameworks. And so I've just put an integration point down there to show that, like, detect and response from the CSF covers the AI RMF in terms of recover, maps to govern, because you need to update your policies, et cetera. So there are some mappings out there that you can find that will help you with that. But the bottom line is, as a healthcare organization, you need to concern yourself with both frameworks to address any traditional cybersecurity as well as AI-specific risks. And that's what HHS is expecting as well in the future, even if it's not mandatory today. That is their guidance. So let's talk about what's changing. I won't, again, try to drain these slides, but I think you are all probably aware that the HIPAA Security Rule has an update that's pending approval. It was released in January of 2025. And I'm painting some very broad brush strokes here, but basically what it does is say that all the things that were previously addressable are now required. That's effectively what's happening. It does bring AI into scope, but in this way. The guidance has effectively been that there doesn't need to be anything special to AI per se in the security rule, because the security rule already covers systems that process ePHI. So if you are developing or implementing an AI system that handles, processes, or otherwise touches ePHI, then you should concern yourself with all of the provisions of the security rule, just like you would if it was an EMR or any other ePHI processing system. So that's the general guideline, and it's reasonable, I think, without being overly prescriptive. The AI security guidance that just came out from HSCC, this was released in June of this year, so just a few days ago. It does address EHR, diagnostics, decision support, and it covers these three categories that I've already mentioned of AI: ML, generative AI, and agentic AI. And it's attempting to align with the FDA requirements, the NIST AI, RMF, and CISA. The Healthcare Cybersecurity Act of 2025, this is an attempt to sort of bring some agencies together that have different responsibilities for cybersecurity, and create a unified voice, or at least unified messaging from there, including tailored threat intelligence for healthcare. So I won't drain the Trump executive orders, but I list them here for reference in case you want to go and take a look at them. President Trump and this particular administration, they do signal a very deregulatory approach to AI, in the sense that these executive orders tend to fall in that category, including some preemption of some state possible rules, which we'll see how that plays out in the courts. But otherwise, there's a number of executive orders and other items that are being proposed to address AI, the United States AI dominance that we feel today in the industry, and to help maintain that going forward. And that's everything from deregulation on data center creation to, you can see there, unlocking cures for pediatric cancer, ensuring a national policy framework around AI for government agencies, et cetera. And so there's a number of different things that are included in that list. So that's there for you to go and peruse on your own. But there's a lot of good activity there. The CISA cyber event reporting, this is a proposed rule that would require healthcare to report cyber attacks within 72 hours and ransomware payments within 24 hours. So this is still in pending, but it's out there. So here's the practical action step. And this is what I tell all of my clients from an advisory perspective. When you are looking at all of these changes and all these things, they're happening in real time, right? You can see that one of those executive orders was just published on June 26th. Oh, no, in June of 26. But they're happening all the time. We've got the uncertainty around whether or not the new security rule changes are going to actually be memorialized. When it's all said and done, my recommendation is that you start doing a gap assessment now against those proposed changes. And it's not because I feel like the government will actually, this administration will actually adopt those changes. They may not. They very well may. I'm not suggesting one way or the other. But when it's all said and done, I recommend this for two reasons. One, you need a gap assessment because if it does happen, you don't want to be caught off guard, and you don't want to be behind, the 8 ball, as it were. And it is likely, and this is the key point, it is very, very likely that even if the federal government does not adopt those requirements, your cybersecurity insurance carrier will, if they haven't already. So if you're not doing TLS 1.2 plus, that's a big gap. And my guess is that your insurance premium reflects it. If you're not doing encryption or annual pen testing, your insurance premium likely reflects it. So it's best to start doing that. The second reason why I suggest that you do a gap analysis and start doing the things that are proposed is because they're not cheap, right? When it's all said and done, there's going to be a lot of dollars spent on fixing the gap, especially for items that you may have glossed over as addressable but now become required. But for instance, just by way of magnitude, I'll tell you, annual pen testing. I've seen quotes for doing annual pen test from $10,000 to $150,000, depending on the scope and size of the organization. So not only should you be looking at this from a regulatory alignment or cybersecurity insurance alignment, but you need to be looking at it from a budgetary perspective. You need to start deciding and planning today in your budgets for what might be hitting your budgets next year with respect to these things. Yes, you will have some time to implement these changes once they're adopted, but there's no reason now not to be looking at the financial impacts at the very least. And like I said, you're likely to have insurance obligations anyway. All right, so from an auditor perspective and whether or not you're supporting audits, look a bit frozen there. I apologize. Am I good technically, moderator Jennifer?
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. So you need to concern yourself with these things, and this is provided to you as a reference, but you need to concern yourself with data poisoning. So that's manipulating the data, that's either training the AI model that could lead to misdiagnosis, incorrect medication recommendations, et cetera, biased decisions based on how it was trained on the demographics it was trained on, model drift. So over time, the AI tries to learn, right? And if it is constantly giving you wrong information, it's going to remember that unless you tell it different, and it's going to then assume that that's the right answer, and it will keep giving that wrong answer, and so it will drift over time. So you got to manage for that. You got to audit for that. You got to look for that. You got to help support the auditors and the assessments when they're looking for these things, and therefore you need a good governance program that helps manage these things. Model manipulation, PHI in the training data. And then, of course, agent or agentic system risk. Bottom line for agentic risk is you need to be reviewing those from a governance perspective on a very regular basis to ensure that they don't have rights that they shouldn't have, et cetera, right? I just throw this in here. I won't talk too much about this, but everyone's heard of quantum computing. Quantum computing is real. Quantum computing is going to happen. It is on the cusp of a very major technical breakthrough, similar to AI a few years ago, and similar to some other IT advancements. And what's happening, what we do see happening, is you might encrypt your data today, and you might get attacked. They might exfiltrate your data, knowing that it's encrypted and knowing they can't do anything with it, but also knowing that 3 years from now, they're going to be able to decrypt that data once they have access to quantum computing. And then you might get the ransom notice. And so you might have exfiltrated data that you don't even know about because they didn't ask for ransom yet, right? So those are kinds of things to concern yourself with as well. So when you look at how you traditionally analyze or review traditional security reviews, you might do things like you might ask your vendors for a copy of their HIPAA security risk assessment or some attestation to that, their SOC 2s, the ISOs. You might ask for those things, any compliance documentation. You might risk rate those vendors. You should be risk rating those vendors. You should be doing annual security assessments. You should be looking at your BAAs on a regular basis and updating those. You likely are doing pen testing for PCI, if nothing else, but either way, you should be looking at that. And usually it takes a couple of weeks or so whenever you're doing some sort of assessment on a traditional security review. When you factor AI into the mix, you have all of that plus things like the risk classification for the AI. So is there a patient safety impact? Is there PHI sensitivities? What's the automation level? All of that goes into the risk rating for a particular system. Training data governance, right? So again, what data was used to train it and how is that data managed over time, enhanced over time, and then fed back into the model. Adversarial testing like prompt injection, data poisoning we talked about. Model transparency, that's where the vendor is telling you this is what the model does, this is how it's built, and this is what it's used for. Please don't deviate from this, that, or the other. Bias and fairness evaluation, continuous modeling for model drift. And this can take now anywhere from what used to take 2 to 4 weeks. It might take you 6 to 12 weeks, right? You should have an AI bill of materials that either the vendor provides you as part of the model card, or if you're building something internally, you should know every software components, including the base LLM and all of the bits that go around that, the orchestration bits and whatnot that go around that. You should have that as your bill of materials to know and manage it actively, right? So you can make changes and then report on it if you need to from a governance perspective. And then the agentic AI review, which I've mentioned a couple of times, checking on a regular basis for permissions, that there's an audit trail, that everything it does, just like if it was a human and it's inside your EMR doing something, make sure that all of the agent activities are being logged appropriately and it's being logged as this is agentic activity, prompt injection, resilience, etc. So with that, we will move to the next polling question.
Our third question is, when assessing your AI cybersecurity posture, which NIST AI RMF function specifically addresses ongoing monitoring for model bias, safety degradation, and performance drift? Govern, map, measure, or manage? You must fill out 3 of the polling questions to receive CPE credit. You'll have 30 seconds to answer. All right. Thank you for participating in our poll. Back to John.
All right, so this one tripped us up a little bit. It is measure. I don't expect you necessarily to know the AI RMF in detail, but the right answer is measure. That is the place where you address things like bias, safety degradation, and the like. So this next section, I'm going to run through this because I know we're running out of time here. Again, I won't drain all these slides, but from a readiness framework for healthcare, here are the things that you should concern yourself. Does a formal AI governance board or process exist, right, from a governance and oversight? So I'm just kind of hitting the highlighted items there. Are AI deployments inventoried and risk classified, right? So every AI that's used in your system, I know I've said this earlier, needs to be inventoried. There needs to be an active registry, just like all of your other ePHI systems, especially, and they need to be risk rated and risk classified. From the risk assessment perspective, are the third-party AI vendors included in those risk assessments, in your IT risk assessments or business risk assessments, making sure that whatever they're providing you is sound and reasonable and meets some standard? Is the process for evaluating AI tools, is there a process for evaluating AI tools before deployment? You have to have a good governance program that prevents the deployment of AI, especially agentic AI or especially generative AI, because it's so readily accessible. And everyone in your organization needs to understand that they cannot just go to ChatGPT and start putting in PHI, right? They have to be trained to do that, there's likely no good way that you can prevent them from doing it. So it comes down to a policy decision and an enforcement activity on your side, and then a management activity and monitoring activity to make sure that if it's happened, that it's known. But that there has to be something done to make sure that before any AI tool is deployed or access is granted to these tools or websites, that it's done in a considered means. Again, on the technical controls, zero trust architecture, right? So you cannot trust the AI to do everything that the vendor is going to tell you that it can do without any consideration whatsoever, right? So on the agentic side, you want to make sure that it is not doing more than it should. It doesn't have rights that it shouldn't have, et cetera. On the incident response and recovery, so is the post-incident AI model part of the revalidation part of the post-incident activity? So once you do have an event that either specifically involves AI or possibly involved AI, you have to make sure that your process and procedures for incident response post-mortem activities include revalidating the model, reevaluating the whole system and whatnot, and then that feedback loop of making sure that the policy, procedures, et cetera, all get updated based on whatever the findings were from the postmortem of the incident. So from a pro tip perspective, map your risk assessment activities to both CSF and AI RMF functions for comprehensive coverage aligned across HHS expectations. We kind of talked about that already. Some questions that you should be asking. So there's likely two audiences here. There's folks who should be asking these questions of your CISO, your IT leadership, or your board. And then you're likely also a CISO or IT leadership or even a board member or governance committee member, and you're listening to this. So whether you're going to be the one asking the question or you're going to be one receiving the question, you should prepare yourself for some of these things, right? So for instance, very practical, ask your IT folks, is MFA implemented on every remote access point? What evidence do you have that that's been done, whether it's your HISRA, your security risk assessment, or other vulnerability scans or whatnot? What evidence do they have if they say yes? Because MFA is one of those things where you can turn it on for certain applications and you might not turn it on for others, and it still leaves you exposed like Change was. What AI tools are deployed in security operations, your EDR vendors, and how are they using AI, et cetera, and how are they validated, et cetera, et cetera. Are deepfake scenarios included? We talked about that in your tabletop exercise as well as your regular training, annual training. On the board side, do we have an AI governance policy for both operational AI and AI cyber threats, right? So that's using AI like generative AI and those kinds of things, as well as what you use to defend yourself. What are the gaps against the HIPAA Security Rule changes that are coming with respect to what now becoming mandatory? You could ask that question. Do you have a post quantum cryptography? Sorry, that one's tripping me up. Roadmap for long-term retention PHI, right? So knowing that you have the requirement to retain this information in a secure manner, knowing that quantum computing is coming that could very easily decrypt that stuff. Do you have a strategy? That's very cutting edge. I'm not expecting anybody to truly have anything on that just yet, but there's that to consider. From I'll leave this one to you as well, so you can go through this. This kind of maps the framework references to the various concepts that we've talked about here today. And then this slide, I just want to point out for any of you out there who are familiar with SOC 2s and the trust service criterias, if you are buying AI, whether it's your AI cyber defense software or, again, an AI tool that you're using in a clinical setting or whatnot, you should be asking those vendors for things like their SOC 2 and other attestations and other certifications. But you have to look one layer below that, right? Because in the TSCs for a SOC 2, security is the only mandatory criteria, right? And so, but when you're handling PHI, when your clinical systems become really truly dependent on the AI data processing solution or otherwise, you have to concern yourself with security, availability, confidentiality, privacy, all five in some cases, and you can get away with a shorter list in some, but either way, these are things that you need to be asking to deeper dive into your risk assessments of your vendors. So Jennifer, I know we are out of time. We've had 4 polling questions, or we've had 3. I've got another one we could go forward with.
And what we can do is the next slide is the polling question. We can go ahead and do polls 4 and 5 back to back. And that way the audience has time in case somebody's missed a poll. They are guaranteed to get their 3. And then everyone who would like to stay on with us for John's last few slides, please do. If you can't do that, then we will have this on demand later, and you'll be receiving links to that. So let's go ahead and do the poll.
Okay.
And that way everybody who can join us and stay with us will do so. All right, so our 4th question: AI governance in a healthcare organization is the responsibility of the Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, or all of the above. You'll have about 30 seconds to reply, and then we will move into question 5. All right, thank you for participating in our poll. We're going to go ahead and jump to 5. John, do you have anything you'd like to say to these responses now?
The correct answer is all of the above, because it is a cross-functional need, and it doesn't rely on any one person to own that. So your governance committee and governance organization should truly be a fully cross-functional group.
Great. All right, now on to question number 5. When performing or supporting an AI cybersecurity risk assessment, which of the following represents the most complete and appropriate scope of work? Review the organization's SOC 2 reports from all AI vendors and confirm that BAAs are in place. Verify MFA is enabled on EHR systems and confirm the incident response plan has been updated in the past year. Confirm the IT department has an AI inventory, test MFA on all remote access systems, and review the IR plan for AI-specific scenarios, such as deepfakes, data poisoning, and model drift. Or inventory all deployed AI tools, assess vendor contracts for AI-specific PHI and data reuse clauses, verify MFA across all remote access, evaluate SOC metrics, confirm AI-specific scenarios and tabletop exercises, and perform gap assessment against the proposed HIPAA Security Rule. You will have approximately 30 seconds to answer. All right, thank you for participating. If you can stay on with us, please do. If you need to drop, please don't forget to complete the survey at the end. There is a survey window down below the presentation window on your dashboard. And now I will turn it back over to John.
Thank you. So for that last question, the last answer is correct. There should be an inventory across all of the tools that are in use and the gap assessment, et cetera. I will, for the recording, go back and just hit a couple of slides. Some of the takeaways here are AI defense tools are essential. AI is weaponized against us, and as auditors and those supporting audits in the healthcare environment, we need to integrate NIST AI RMF, assess AI inventory, vendor risk, the inventory and the vendor risk, verify deepfake readiness, and prepare for the new change. You can see that was obviously the feed into the poll question. So here's a practical item for you. Just in terms of immediate, you should be looking to make sure that MFA is enforced across all remote systems, no exceptions. Within the next 30 days, it would be good to maybe perhaps go and, depending on your responsibility within your organization, request a complete inventory of all AI tools that are out there, including AI agents that are operating in your environment, and just see where and who has responsibility and ownership and accountability for that. And if no one has that, then that leads into you need a policy, and then you need a set of procedures to have that particular function performed. Within 60 days, conduct a gap assessment against the new HIPAA rules, again, looking at not only operational impacts, but also the budgetary impacts. within 90 days, incorporate some of these AI-specific scenarios into your next AR, your incident response tabletop exercise. And then I just mentioned this in passing, but Health ISAC, if you're not a member, this is not a pitch for Health ISAC. It is a paid membership. But they actually do have some very good threat intelligence feeds and with some real-time updates, including if your data were to appear on dark websites. Your EDR vendor likely has some of that same threat intelligence, but it is a good healthcare-specific threat intelligence and source of information. So finally, I have listed all the references and the resources for your perusal offline, should you have any questions about that. And if you did post any questions into the system here, we will take those offline and get back to you as soon as we can. I want to thank you all very much. I do apologize for going 7 minutes over, but thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope this was helpful.
Great. Thanks to our presenter, John Cross, and thanks to everybody who stayed on with us. Later today, you'll receive an email with a link to access his contact information, a copy of the slides, and a recording of this webinar. Please remember to stay on the line when we disconnect to complete the short surveys for CPE credit. Once complete, your CPE certificate is downloadable via the CPE pane. To rewatch the symposium and access all the slides and on-demand recordings of all of our webinars, please visit the Thought Leadership section at pyapc.com. While at our website, you may register for other PYA webinars and learn more about the full range of services offered by PYA. Thank you very much again, and now back to Catherine Good to close out the symposium.
Thank you, Jennifer. And on behalf of PYA, thank you for joining us for our Summer CPE Symposium. If PYA can help you with audit, tax, compliance, valuation, or transaction services, please contact us. You may also visit our website at pyapc.com for more details about our specific areas of expertise and to receive PYA insights. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to this PYA webinar recast. The video recording, slides, and associated material for this and all PYA webinars are available on our website. If you have any questions or if we can help, please contact us at pyapc.com. Thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.